Money!
What Your Bank Doesn't Tell You, a podcast by UMushroom.
Everybody, and welcome back to our podcast, What Your Bank Doesn't Tell You. Today, with this podcast, we're also starting our movement, #KnowYourWorth. In this respect, we are talking about money and art today, and in particular, what is the value of certain art pieces. And for this, I have a very special guest. I have Pascal Schneidinger with me here today, and you're kind of an expert in this field when it comes to money and art, because you have a very interesting background. If I saw it correctly on your LinkedIn profile, basically you started some years back in banking in the real estate area. So you know banking and everything what has to do with money inside out. And then you got into entrepreneurship, and today you're basically combining both angles, the entrepreneurship and what you learned in banking, and you're combining art and money. So indeed, the perfect guest to kick off our movement. Welcome, Pascal.
Thanks a lot for the invitation, Tanya. It's good to be here.
So tell me maybe a bit more about your background.
Sure.
I just did a very brief summary, and it would be interesting to all of us to really know what is your know-how when it comes to banking, and how do you link it to the art?
Yeah, of course. So just quickly to my background, I'm from Zurich originally. I grew up here, but I left Switzerland in 1999. I moved to the US to go to university there. And after university, as you mentioned, I was in investment banking and private equity in the real estate space for quite a long time in New York and in London. And then in 2011, I wanted to do something a bit more entrepreneurial. So I quit and I moved to Shanghai, and I started a company in a very, very different field. I started a home furnishing retail company. So we had quite a lot of physical stores throughout China. And this was very interesting, and it worked out quite well. And I did this for about 10 years. And I moved back to Zurich nearly 3 years ago now to start this new company, Partasio, which, as you briefly alluded to, combines finance, investment, and art. And maybe just briefly to tell you, why I started this company or what the company is about. I've always believed that most people are not sufficiently diversified when it comes to their financial portfolio. And I believe that real or professional diversification is actually very challenging. So I looked at different asset classes, and that's how I ended up in the art world, to be honest. So I'm not from the art market at all. That's not my background, as you can tell. But I've done a lot of research about it, and I came to the conclusion that by now the art market is certainly the largest asset class that is really diversifying, because a lot of asset classes that your viewers are familiar with, they're maybe supposed to be diversifying, but last year and also this year to a certain extent showed that they're actually not, and they actually correlate very strongly with each other. So art really is the largest asset class that features very low correlation with other asset classes. That's number one. And number two, due to the very special dynamics of the art world, the entry barriers are very high. So it's almost impossible to really access that market. So what we do at Partasio is we offer people for the first time in a simple but very professional way the opportunity to invest into a diversified portfolio of top quality art, physical art. That way, being able to A, diversify a financial portfolio, and B, generate attractive risk-adjusted returns.
Very interesting, and indeed very brave steps to go from banking into retail in the Chinese market, and then coming back to Switzerland and starting in a completely new area again. You mentioned before a very interesting point, and you said invest into, I believe you said, good art and high quality art, I believe you said. So what is high quality art in your opinion?
That's a good question. So as in every market, the art market has many, many different segments. We strongly believe that if you invest in art with financial considerations in mind, you should focus on, we call it blue chip art. It's really the top quality segment of the art world. Now, how do we define that? For us, an artist is blue chip if he or she is long-term relevant both from a financial and art historical perspective. So to phrase it in more kind of public equity stock market terms, it's real value investing. We go after the Nestle's, the Johnson & Johnsons of this world, the kind of artists that have a very long track record, have very low volatility, low downside risk, etc.
So it's basically the more kind of wealth preservation than
Yeah,
really...
it is definitely a wealth preservation approach. But if you look at the returns of these type of artists, they generate returns that far exceed stock market returns. So it's certainly the most, I would say, conservative approach within the art market. But still, due to the dynamics of the art market, the returns that you can generate in that segment are very attractive.
And usually on the stock side, if you do value investing, then you do your research to find undervalued stocks. How would you do that in the art market?
That's a good question. So, I also invest in the stock market, of course. The definition of undervalued stock is very challenging because the stock market is so efficient. You cannot find really undervalued stocks. That's your opinion that it's undervalued. But objectively, the market price is the actual stock price. The art market works very differently. It's not an efficient, transparent market as such. So it's a real insider market. And that's what I personally find very interesting and attractive in this market. Because it's an insider market. In an insider market, there are people who are in the market and there are people who are not in the market. And we at Partasio, due to our art experts, we are insiders. And that way, we only buy off market, which means we don't buy at auction, we don't buy at art fairs. In fact, we don't even buy paintings that ever traded at auction. And that way, we don't pay the crazy high commissions that you pay in the art market. At an auction house, you pay 25% commission. We don't pay that. And number two, we have the ability to continuously buy at quite significant discounts to market value. So when you talk about undervalued art, I think in a certain way, it's much easier to do that in the art market with the if it's a very big if you have the right network approach and access.
Okay, so it's more about having the right connections.
Yes and no. I always say the winning formula, in my opinion, in the art market is the combination between the financial world and the art world. And at the same time, that's the really big challenge because these are two very, very different worlds with different personalities. So we try to combine both worlds, which I think makes us quite unique. So we have the very analytical approach of the financial world, which gets you to a certain stage within the art market. But given the opacity of the market and lack of data, you cannot make investments purely from an analytical perspective. And then you have the more qualitative aspect, experience, network, as you mentioned, from the art market. And if you bring those two worlds together, that really is the winning formula.
Also in respect to these two worlds, what would be very interesting to me is to get a better understanding who defines the value of an art piece. Because you can have some very modern art and many people might think, okay, this could be done by my godchild, so why has it worth multiple millions? And there could be another painting which you believe, okay, this artist would have spent, I don't know how many days on that, and the value is basically nothing. So what are the criteria and what are the drivers to generate value?
So I would distinguish between emotional value and financial value. I think what you're alluding to is more financial value. The financial value of art is very basic. It depends on supply and demand, right? And that's the reason why we believe that you should focus on the top quality segment of the art world, because the vast majority of art, of paintings that you can buy in a gallery has maybe some emotional value, but the second you purchase that painting, the financial value decreases to zero, or it's extremely volatile and speculative. If you go more after the top quality artists that I mentioned before, there is a real market. There's real demand, supply. And the interesting part about the art market is that the demand is generally driven by wealth. The more wealthy people you have, the more overall wealth you have, the higher the demand for top quality art. And that's been the reason why demand has increased, for generations. But on the supply side, the dynamics are quite different because top quality art usually is produced by artists who are either not alive anymore or at a very advanced age. And that means supply is stable to even decreasing. And for that reason, you're in a segment or you have a dynamic where demand increases, supply is stable to decreasing, and very simple, that's the reason why prices have gone up for decades and decades.
So for you personally, how would you value the emotional value to the financial value? Or would you personally, would you buy art just based on emotions or not at all?
Yeah, so I think it's important to distinguish what is your objective, right? Do you want to buy a painting because you like it and you want to hang it at home? Or do you want to buy it for investment purposes? I think depending on that decision, your approach is going to be very different. For the first, ignore the financial aspect because, as I mentioned, most likely you will lose all the money, So buy something you love, that you want to spend time with, that you want to learn about, that you really have an emotional connection with. If you approach it more from a financial perspective like us, then you need to be very agnostic, very, unemotional in that way, right? Just look at, does that particular painting make sense from a financial perspective? But then, and that's the beauty of it, art is a cultural good. So what we do and what we believe is very important is to build the emotional aspect around the investment, because you can learn a ton about the artists, about his or her movement, their background, history, etc. So I think it's fascinating to have an investment that is not just a boring investment where, hopefully you will make a lot of money on, but you can also learn something and you can really benefit from an emotional, cultural perspective as well.
You mentioned culture and art. So what's the society's impact on the art market in general?
Well, there are cultural institutions all over the world, right? I lived in China for a long time. It's been interesting that when I moved to China in 2011, at least for foreigners, I think the cultural offering in terms of art was quite limited. But as the Chinese society became wealthier, as lifestyle became more important, the government put a lot of focus on building up cultural institutions. So all of a sudden, they built up these amazing, massive museums where they would show, top quality and also contemporary art. And that goes kind of hand in hand, right? I think as people become more demanding, as lifestyle is more important, culture and art as part of culture becomes always more important.
And do you believe the society needs to understand the art?
It's a strong word, needs to. I think some people are interested in it, some people are not.
No, but I mean, there is art which is maybe easier to understand and other art which is a bit more complex or abstract.
Yeah,
to what extent is it important that the society really buys into that?
I think it's very important. I think I can take myself as kind of a test case. Before Partasio, I was culturally interested like millions of other people. So I would go to museums once in a while, but I was never a collector. So I would look at the painting, I would read about it and move on maybe. And now that I'm very involved in the art market, I obviously need to learn and understand a lot more about the actual painting, the reason for having been created, etc. And I think it's super fascinating to learn about all these different aspects, to learn about the artist, to learn, like I said, about his or her background. And you can learn so much about society and history by looking at what looks maybe like a very simple painting. So I think it's fascinating.
So listening to you, emotions are important, but also if you really want to save and consider art as an investment, then we shouldn't forget the demand and supply and really the financial drivers behind. But for all of us, do you have a tip, a very concrete tip, how to buy art and maybe also affordable art? Of course, we can invest in your solutions, in your investment solutions to get a piece of the blue chip art, but maybe also for some of our more emotional buyers, would you have an insider tip?
It's very simple. I think for emotional buyers, buy what you like. It doesn't matter what it is, who painted it, why he or she painted it, what the price is. Buy what you like. Don't buy it for investment purposes. Again, if you buy something for investment purposes, in my opinion, you should focus on the top quality only. And the reality is you will most likely not have access to that. A, because the prices are very high. And B, because access also from a art market dynamics perspective is just very challenging. And that's exactly why we created this investment solution.
Yeah, I find it a really interesting topic, and I believe also we could spend on discussing the value of emotion and finances for hours. And also there's so many different perspectives. And given our movement, Know Your Worth, it's also in our very normal life. You can discuss the value of something for hours because something has value to me, but maybe not to you. And this is exactly what we want to start questioning, that we are getting more and more aware what is important to ourselves, where would we like to spend our money, and to really drive the things which are actually important in our lives. And I believe art is just a very nice example to make it a very visual and having a very concrete example or a very extreme example as well. So have we forgotten anything to cover? Is there anything you would like to share with us in addition?
I don't know, we could speak for hours. I don't know, depends on what you would like to know and talk about. I'm sorry, don't know.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Then I think we leave it for today, and maybe we can do an update in a couple of months' time to see how the art scene is actually changing, how it's developing, whether we have even more wealthy people investing in art, if it's booming more and more, or whether we see another development. So with this, I would like to highlight again, if you have any questions or input, write us to hello@umushroom.com. And we are very much looking forward to welcome you very soon for the next podcast. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Money!
What Your Bank Doesn't Tell You, a podcast by UMushroom.